In some previous MySQL videos, we've gone over how to install MySQL and also how to connect to a remote MySQL instance, and then finally we saw how to use an application server to be able to connect to our remote MySQL server in a secure way. But now I want to talk about MySQL replication. Now there's a few ways you can do replication in MySQL, but I'm going to do what's called a master-slave setup, or a master replica setup. In this case, we have a master database which accepts read and write connections, and then we have a replica database which just copies everything that happens on the master database. This database can be used for things like jobs that are process intensive that need to read the database, or it can be used as a second database to be read from, so you can distribute read requests, read queries across multiple servers. Now in this video, I'm just going to show you how to set up one master database and one replica database. So on the top here, we have a master database. I'll just log into this real quick. And we can see the databases in here, and I just have a database that we're concerned about here called my app. So if we use my app, we can see what's in it. I only have one table in here, it's just called users, and if we select star from users, we'll see there's just one entry in the worst application database ever, which has plain text passwords. But anyway, that's the master database, the database which has data. And in this scenario, I want to add a replica database to a database that already exists, which is actually a different use case. There's two scenarios. We might start fresh with no database, with no data, or we might start with a database that already has data in it and we want to add a replica database. Because that's the more common use case and has some qualifiers to it, I'm going to go with that second scenario. So in the master database on top, we have a database called my app, we have a table with users, and we'll just pretend that this is an actively used database. On the bottom here, we have the replica database. This is a server that has an empty MySQL server on it, that has no extra tables or anything, and we want to make this the replica database. Before we dig into that, I want to show you the IP tables rules I have for this. You may want to check out the firewall rules videos I have outcoming if you want to know more about what's going on here. But the main thing here is that I've allowed incoming traffic to the input chain on the master database server to accept traffic on port 3306, the MySQL port, from the source here, the replica database server. And that happens to be 172.314.1.248, which you can see matches with the IP address of the replica server down here. So I'm specifically saying that this server is allowed to connect to the master database server and grab the data to replicate it. So let's configure some stuff here. First, we're going to configure the master database to allow connections from a replica database, and then we'll set up the replica database so that it pulls from the master database. So first, we should head to the MySQL configuration, and here we're going to edit the my.conf file. So what we need to do here is give this a server ID, and you can see these are commented out. I'm just going to keep server ID 1. It doesn't really matter what the server ID is, so long as they are unique amongst each instance of MySQL being used. And then I'll also uncomment the log bin directive here, which has the path to the binary log that MySQL creates. This is a log that is saved in a binary format that the replica databases read in order to copy from. It's basically a log that has every query made that changes the database, so not read queries, but every write query, and the replica database will grab that and replay those queries on that server. So now that we've set the server ID and made sure we have a bin log enabled here, we can save and quit that, and we can, well, we're going to have to restart this, but let's do that in a second. I'm going to first log back into MySQL, and I'm going to create a user who can connect as a replica. We're going to grant replication slave. Slave is the term used by MySQL for the replica user, the replica system. We're going to give that permissions to every database and every table on the database. And we're going to create the user here. I'm just going to call it replication user at, and depending on your use case, you can do all hosts or something else, but I'm specifically going to do the IP address of our one replication server because I only have one. And so I don't have to worry about this replication user needing to work for multiple hosts. And I'm just going to say some password as the password here. You, of course, should use something more secure. All right, now I will flush privileges. Great. Let's see, user host from MySQL.user. We can just make sure that user is here. Replication user is allowed from this database. All right, that's great. Now let's restart this. and we'll log back in. All we've done here is to create a replication user that the other replication servers will use to connect, and we set up a server ID and told MySQL where to put the bin log. Next, we need to do a few things. If this is an active database, we need to freeze the database temporarily so that users cannot do actions on it. Then we need to get the position of the bin log that the server is currently set up at. And this position is important because the replica server needs to know where in the bin log to start replicating from. So what we're going to do here is get that position and tell the replication server what that position is. And then we can unlock the database because the replication server then has the information it needs to know to continue off of a certain point. So the steps here are to lock the server, the master server that is, flush tables with read lock, so read-only mode. And then we can show master status. Now this says the bin log position is 120. This is the bin log that's set up. And great, we're not doing any of these other options. This is all we need to know for now. I'm just going to copy this. And we're going to put that into a text file off page here. You should save this information as well because we'll need it later down the road when we get that position of 120 back onto the replica database. All right, now I have to do something tricky here. I need to keep this read-only, so this database has to stay locked. So what I'm going to do here is actually go over here and log into the master database again so we can export the database in the current state that it's in while that read lock is in place. Or I'm sorry, while that write lock is in place. Because we need this database exported at this state where the bin log is at position 120. And then we can give that to the replica so it can get that MySQL dump import, and then we can tell it to start from position 120 in the bin log. So let's see, I'm going to SSH-O, identities only, yes. If you have questions on what I'm doing here, you can see my other videos on logging into your SSH. You may not need to do these steps like I do, such as adding identities only. I have to do that because I have a lot of SSH keys in here, and I need to make sure that this specifically uses one for this server. Alright, so now I'm logged in here twice, one on the master server up here where I'm logged into MySQL while I have the database locked. Alright, so here I'm going to do my SQL dump as user root, give it a password. I want the my app database, I'll save that to my app.sql. And we can see that file here. Great. Now, I've locked the database, I've gotten the bin log position, I've exported the database. Now I can unlock this so that the database can continue on as normal. Alright, so the master server can be used again, it can be written to again because we've unlocked the read lock there. And now on the replica server, we can suck in the MySQL dump and then start replication off the master server from position 120 in the bin log. So the first thing I need to do is actually go back here and I need to get this file over to this server. So I don't have a share setup that's convenient between the two, so I'm actually going to download this to my server and then upload it. So let's see, we just have the SSH command here. You can conveniently just change this to the SCP command. And I know this is just in the home directory, my app.sql, and I want this to my desktop, my app.sql. Alright, that's there. Now I need to do the same. I'm going to bring this to my app.sql. Alright, so now I'm going to grab that from my desktop and upload it to my replica server that's at this public IP address. And I want that file to be saved to the home directory there, and just call it my app.sql once again. Great. Now over here in my replica server, we can see my app.sql exists. So let's just pop that in. So we do MySQL-u root-p, and I'm actually going to create database my app here real quick, and that database is created, and now we can import to it. Oops, wrong password. Alright, great. So let's log into that and make sure that's there. It is, and we can use my app and show tables, select star from users, all that good stuff. Great. Okay, so far we have gone to the master database, we've given it an ID, we've set up where the bin log is, then we froze the database, we gave it a read lock, so it was read only, can't write to it. We got the bin log position, we did an export of the database, then we unlocked it. Now over on the replica server, we have grabbed that MySQL dump file, we've imported it after making the new database. So the replica is basically at the same point of the master database when we made that database copy. So now we need to configure the replica database to start reading from the master database from that binlog position 120. So I'm in the etc MySQL directory. Let's edit the my.conf file. Here, once again, we need to set the server ID. I'll just set this to 2 since it was 1 on the previous server, and it just needs to be a different ID. Once again, we'll uncomment the bin log, so this has one. And on top of that, I want to add a relay log. We'll do var log MySQL relay bin.log. The name doesn't matter, just as long as it has a relay log. Now we can save and quit that and restart MySQL. Looks like MySQL was off there, and now I just restarted it. Let's make sure it's running. All right, great. Now we need to log in and do a few more things. So the replica database now has all the data it needs to start replicating from the master database. Now we just need to tell it that is in fact a replica database and to start sucking in data from master. Let's make this database know that it's a replica database and know where the master database is. So we'll do change master to master host. Gotta spell that right. The master host is the master database here. So that's 172.31.35.183. We'll do master user equals, that was replication user. Master password equals, I believe I just did some password. Master log file we will get from right up here. We'll do master log position, which we'll grab from up here as well. So position is just 120. We'll just use 120 here. And that should be it. All right, so here's the command to make the replica database connect to the master so it knows where the master is. So we'll change master to the following parameters. Master host is the IP address here, which is the IP address of our master database. Master user was the user we made, replication user. Master password, the password we made, some password. Master log file is MySQL bin 00001, which is grabbed directly from show master status up here. And the same with position 120 for the master log POS position parameter here. Great. Now we will start slave. So start this MySQL database as a slave. And we can finally show slave status to see if this is working. And this is great. We don't have any connection errors, nothing like that. We can see slave has read all relay log waiting for IO. So let's exit that, and up here we'll give that some IO to check out. Let's just make sure you can see what we're doing here. And use my app. Show tables, great. And let's see, select star from users. We have one user there. So now here, let's make a change. Let's insert into users. I'm going to update the username password field with the values, Chris, and another lame password. All right, one row affected. Now let's check this out. Perfect. The replica database was updated automatically. And we can see that's quick, and of course it's quick because this is not a heavily used database. This is literally the only query ran within the last, X minutes. Now that's the basics. What we did here to review was to install MySQL on 2 servers. One server we'll pretend was an already existing database, and from that we had to do a few things to get the data to the replica database. So on the master database, we locked it so that no more writes could be made. We got the binlog position, then we copied the database using MySQL dump, and then finally, since we had the information needed, we could let that database be wrote to again, so we undid the table lock, the database lock, I should say. On the replica side, we created that database, we sucked in the database from that MySQL dump we made from the master, then we started it up as a replica database, giving it the master information, running the start slave command, and that started sucking in the data from the relay log. So the bin log on the master database gets read into the relay log on the replica database. The replica database then replays all the queries on that side, and all that new data gets sucked into the replica database. Both databases needed their myconf file edited, so they had different server IDs. So they had a bin log, and then so the replica database had a relay log location to write to. So it's kind of a complicated setup, but it's not too bad overall, and it's a really great way for people with a database that doesn't handle lots of reads well to expand read queries across multiple databases. So you have one server, one database server where you write to, but two now where you can read from. Now, of course, there's a little bit of an assumption here. So if you read from both databases using like a load balancer or have some mechanism in your code that switches between what databases it reads from, you can run into a situation where the replica database is behind the master database. So you could get some inconsistent results there. But in general, it's okay. The replication lag is usually pretty small unless you have a very high rate database. But you need to know about that for the situations where it's very important that the reads queries are explicitly accurate up to the second. In general, this is a great way for people with a medium-sized application to distribute load across the databases. The other use I've had for this is to actually make a replica database that's both a backup, so it's kind of like a standby in case the master database goes down. You can promote it to a master database and it will start accepting write queries, or I've used the replica database for things like reporting where the read queries are really heavy and slow and I don't want it to affect the main application database.